Okay, good morning, welcome.
100% should actually go.
We have a new Walsh sitting in this seat. For those who were here with Wendy in the last group, Wendy was using that Slido type of thing, the high tech. You can tell I'm a little bit generation ahead of Wendy. I'm back to the 3x5 cards here. So welcome to the Department of the Air Force Senior Leaders Panel. My name is Guy Walsh. I had the distinct privilege and honor of serving in the Air Force, crossing about 5 decades, doing that as active duty for 20 some odd years, following up with 9 years in the National Guard, and then as a civilian with U.S. Cyber Command. And so it's a great honor and privilege for me to be here today with NTSA to lead this. Currently, I serve as the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of National Defense Industrial Association. So if you're not familiar, again, NDIA has been around since 1919, so we're about 105 or so years old. And it's all been about creating this dialogue between industry, academia, and government, and that's exactly what's happening here today. And so my hat's off again to the team from NDIA, for Vice Admiral Sean Buck, for the team. This is my second year to be able to participate with NTSA in doing this type piece there. And so let me start with, and what I'll say was I ended my career in uniform, and it starts with thanking the people in the audience. So when I finished my tour about 13 months in Kandahar in 2009, 2010, I sat down with my executive assistant time, currently Colonel Ramil Kadina, who's the command surgeon for Air Force Reserves right now. But we sat down and said, okay, they're going to give us, I think it was about 30 days after, of downtime. And we looked back and we said, let's make a road trip and visit all of the industries and the schools and the folks who made what we were doing at that time possible with our platforms, with our weapon system, with our training, and as well with the care packages when we were doing all the work with the folks over in Afghanistan. And so we did this trip, and it was simply amazing. We visited small businesses, we visited the large and the primes, having spent a lot of time flying A-10s, working with targeting pods and working with the different munitions. And we got to go out and visit with those people, really to say thank you to the folks out in industry, out at academia. Now again, academia was a lot of high schools and those, but it was actually probably one of the most rewarding opportunities that I had, to do that. So the idea of coming back to NDIA, we're again getting to work because it's all possible. Our goal again is to create that dynamics and the ethical conversations between industry, academia, and the folks that you see on the panel here today. And today we're going to focus, at least the starting point in our theme, is really going to be about the great power competition. Okay, moving from what each of our members here have experienced over the past couple decades of working in Afghanistan and Iraq to the focus that we now have on great power competition, specifically in the modeling and simulation world, and what are those technologies and pieces that we do. I want to give you a couple quick ROEs. One, again, please make sure your cell phones are off. Number two is we will have our team that are walking around now with these cards, 3x5 cards. Again, we're not going high tech with Slido again, Wendy, so, but 3x5 cards. And if you've got questions up there, again, we'll have folks that are dealing with academia, with university, with planning and programming, with operations, with budget, on all those type pieces there. We're not going to try to have every member answer each question to get through as many. Their objective today is to go to your questions, not mine. So we're going to have about 5 to 7 minutes of each of our panel members talking about what they're doing, what their teams are doing to be able to move forward. And that'll be our starting point for today. But it's really about creating that dialogue today, and that's what it's all about. So with that, let me start with some brief introductions, because I want them to be talking, not listening to me. And I'm going to start with, down at the far end, Lieutenant General Andrea Tullis, the commander of and president of Air University down at Maxwell Air Force Base. Andrea comes with a tremendous background, security forces, mission support, understanding the modernization of our base infrastructure, but really the responsibility right now of doing that training for more than 50,000 in-residence students and 120,000 remote type students. All of those programs you see for our commissioning programs with OTS, ROTC, all falling under that Air University aspect. Next to her, we have Lieutenant General Dave Tabor. General Tabor, program planning and programming, half A8. We were talking about whether, we've had 3.5, 3.8, 5.7, but all those type pieces there in planning and program. Coming with a very strong background in special operations. And so understanding the AFSOC and the special operations mission, which typically, again, in a lot of the modeling and simulation and some of those things has been at the leading edge and brings that perspective. Mr. Thomas Lawhead, many of you welcoming back to the stage again in terms of the strategy and integration. So when you're talking the force design that we're working on right now, when you're talking some of the concepts that we're talking about with great power competition, and so he is leading many of those efforts. And then sitting right next to me, sorry, Tony. Tony Simmons, we were just making sure we had the, but Tony Simmons comes out of the operational side with the half A3, but looking at the training aspects of what we're doing. All of those platforms, all of those pieces there, the training infrastructure that we have out there, including the modeling and simulation agency, it falls under his bailiwick. So with that, what we want to do is I want to give each of our panel members to talk for about 5 to 7 minutes to share their perspective, their team's perspective of what I'm going to start with is that theme of great power competition and how after the last couple decades of training and education, preparing folks for the type of combat operations we've been doing, how are we making those changes and what are the key changes that we were doing, particularly in the modeling and simulation world. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lawhead to give us a brief introduction from your perspective of where we are right now with force design and great power competition.
Great, thanks Guy, appreciate it, and thanks everybody for being here today. Always fun and interesting to have some conversations about, training generally, which sometimes seems like an add-on to what we do, but is critical to actually how we're able to employ and deter and win. In terms of context, what has changed for us as we look into the near and further future is the operational environment in which our airmen are going to work, are going to fight, has changed and is changing significantly, and that pace of change has been rapid and continues to speed up. If you think back on historically how we kind of progress from generation to generation, very platform-centric, very major command-centric. When C-141 is done with its service life, we got to look at another airlift platform, and we bring on the C-17, and we kind of weave in how one grows as the other one retires. The same is true for the training system, so all very platform-specific. The future operating environment that we're looking at requires us to look across the entire enterprise, and there may not be a system that we need to develop. So what that leads us to, as we look at the force design, is about 14 different mission threads, which is the things that are critical to the joint fight that we have to get after. So counter-maritime, counter-C5ISRT, maintaining our C5ISRT capabilities, counter-air, and air-base air defense. As we look across all of those lines of effort, the commonality between them all is they are not an Air Force-specific mission engineering thread. They are not an Department of the Air Force, i.e. the Air Force and Space Force-specific mission thread. These cover the entire range front of the joint force. So as you break those mission threads down into mission and systems engineering, we, the Department of the Air Force, are not necessarily providing all of those capabilities. So the capabilities that we are providing need to be coordinated with the other services. So that's one of the bigger sea changes that we see, is this isn't an Air Force problem. This is a joint problem, and we need to solve it together. As we look at the way we're going to battle manage and command and control this fight from the very lowest tactical levels through service component commands, through combatant commands, through the joint staff, all of that becomes not just regional, but global. So what happens in Indo-PACOM affects what's going on in EUCOM, affects the ability of TRANSCOM to deploy forces to either theater. So let's bring this back a little bit to training then. What does that mean for us? As we change the nature of our wing structure to enable the ability to deploy a combat wing with an inherent C2 capability to fight from and to actually fight their base, that's a different structure and a different training requirement. If you look at the Service Component Command, who may be a Joint Force Air Component Commander in conflict, may be a Task Force Commander in conflict, the ability to C2 at echelon is a requirement, and that C2 bleeds over into the other component commanders. So the baseline question is, what is the very nature of C2 at the component command level when everything you do crosses multiple service lines and is an all-domain fight? Bring it up an echelon to the joint staff and resource allocation, which now becomes global, not regional or theater specific. The ability to make those choices at the Secretary of Defense level is critical across all the services and across all the combatant commands. So the training that we are looking at now starts all the way up at the Secretary of Defense, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the rest of the Chiefs of Staff, on down through the theater combatant commanders, to the service component commanders, to the wing commanders' ability, both deployed and in garrison here, CONUS and abroad at their main operating bases, to be able to fight those bases. So that is a fundamentally different training proposal than we have seen in the past. And we have to get our arms around how do we do that as a service, from battle management up through C2 at all levels, and what is the training implications to that. So General Slife, the Vice Chief, is very fond and quick to remind us that it is human nature, and certainly maybe Air Force nature, to want to go to the thing. We want the next platform. And it's really easy to get specific about acquisition strategies and the resourcing strategies to do that. What we have historically been not as good at is looking across that whole spectrum and finishing out the rest of the DOT-MIL PFP equation to figure out what organization we need to do that and what training do our airmen need to make that happen at all echelons. So that's clearly a focus of the Vice Chief, which means it's a focus of ours, and that's where we're running to make sure that we get the training required to be able to execute in this new paradigm, in this new operating environment, at scale and at speed. Thanks, Guy.
Very good. So going from the thing, several of you are here for the panel right before us, which was all about that joint training, education type piece there. But as every one of us knows, and if you look at the top of that great power competition, that first thing up there is people, right? It's our officers, it's our enlisted, it's our civilian, it's those type pieces there. So from the people perspective, and having just sat in that same chair in the joint piece of that, I'm going to turn it over to General Tullis just to talk about it from the people perspective and from your perspective sitting at Air University.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I'll start with Air University. So we're your nation's only university that is purposely built to deliver leaders who are experts in the practical application of air power. And so that's from basic training all the way up to our capstone general officer courses. every day is a school day, right? So I'm here to learn from the panel, I'm here to learn from you. And so our platform is the human weapon system. And if we get everything else wrong, we have to get leadership right. Leadership starts when you put this uniform on, and the nation we serve has an expectation. If you have one stripe on your sleeve and you just finished basic training, that we've given you discipline, followership, and that in a crisis you will respond. Like that on some level, that expectation is there. And then we build on that. And so it has been an extraordinary journey in this time of great power competition. And I'll start by saying we've learned a ton, both from it's not just COVID and how we teach this generation of airmen and learn from them, but the flying training experimentation that we've done, like 16 different ways to try and redesign how we teach people how to fly, has just been a waterfall for the rest of Air Education and Training Command to learn from and to change the way that an airman, so I've said this for years now, airmen don't join the Air Force to spend half their tour of duty in training, right? So we owe our airmen the training to win the fight today. It's to respond to the known threat. There's a task, there's a condition, and a standard, and we still need to do that. But we educate them for the threats of tomorrow so that when they're disconnected, if we have to execute mission command, they understand commander's intent, they're connected to a team, they are ready, and they can make those decisions on their own. They have confidence and competence for a very different fight than those of us that are sitting on the stage have experienced for the better part of our career. So if you leave with nothing else, we owe the Air Force, the operational force, brilliance at the basics. Brilliant. Whether you're flying, whether you're maintenance, whether you're administrative, combat service support, we owe you confidence and competence, and we have got to get you through the training pipeline to your operational unit faster. And there is a ton of technological advances which can help us do that. Proficiency advancing, constructive credit. Our airmen are coming in with experiences and skills that are amazing. They're coming in later in life in some cases. They've had jobs in industry already. And so leveraging that and allowing them to advance at their speed of competency is actually easier said than done because it's the institutional processes that are actually holding us back, right? So now you have all the things like, well, wait a minute, that means I'm not going to graduate with my class. And what about my PCS orders aren't ready yet? We don't have that assignment. And so simplifying that process and getting it to the operational commander. So readiness, right? So an operational commander doesn't want their airmen in the institutional command. Like, I'm the antithesis of readiness, right? So that airman has a job on the line out there, and they're going to come to us. So we absolutely owe those commanders. We need to send them back better. I use the depot example. Like, you don't want to send them to Air University and they just get the oil changed and the tires changed and they come back the same car, right? You should expect a complete, modernized, available. We're giving them a toolkit. And I think one of the things we really need to focus on is the training doesn't end when we hand them a certificate and they walk across the stage and go back to their unit. Those line supervisors out there need to give them sets and reps, because if they just chuck the toolkit on the shelf and they don't take any of those tools out, they're really not going to develop proficiency. They may have had a good training experience while we're there, but the operational force needs to understand, like, they have a fair share of the training burden. Now, what do we owe the force? We need to be able to push you the content. Like, we can train very differently now. We be able to push you instructors, if it's mobile training teams, we're doing a lot of mobile education teams, to get to you at the point of need. We have airmen in remote duties around the world. We should be able to get them access to content earlier. Those are all the lessons we learned for, hey, when we couldn't go into the classroom, how do we get the classroom to you? We've completely redefined a classroom. So, the classroom could be an aircraft, the classroom could be a flight line, the classroom could be field conditions because of your special tactics. It could be all the way around the other side of the world. It could be using commercial networks, or it could be downloaded a 5 to 7 minute video so a maintainer can get an aircraft airborne and they don't have a 7 level over their shoulder. All they have is what's on their tablet. And so it's a very different kind of environment, but I have to say, to go back to our heritage, we're the tinkerers. We're the ones that are okay with opening the Lego box, throwing the instructions to the side, and creating. And our airmen, when you give them confidence and competence, like, it's not about just delegating everything down to the lowest level. It has to be at the level that they're trained and ready to operate at. They can do amazing things. I do believe that they can be as lethal, as ready, and the greatest generation that this generation has seen. We just have to give them the tools and turn them loose.
Very good. So each of the members of our panel up here, including Mr. Lawhead, has spent that time commanding in the operation, in the field, as Gerald Tullis was just explaining. Over the last couple days, there's been a lot of dialogue and discussion on the live virtual constructed and the joint simulated environment. So what I want to do is turn it over to General Tabor, who comes out with a lot of the Special Operations Command piece, which was typically leading edge on a lot of those pieces there. But now we talked about policies in the way, but part of it is also how we work the budget, right? How we actually do that programming type piece of that. And so with that, let me turn it over from that perspective in terms of some of these new changes with GPC from a programmer perspective, just where we are and what are those changes that we're having.
Yeah, thanks very much. Whenever I speak in these audiences, I kind of feel like I have the unenviable task of dumping cold water on everybody else's hopes and desires, because if there's not money, it's not real. And that is certainly true. So backing up a little bit, and I'll get to kind of the point here. We have an aging force, and that's not just aircraft, it's technology, it's infrastructure. It kind of spans the gamut of capabilities in the Air Force. And arguably, we should have started doing some of the recapitalization 30 or 40 years ago. But if you go back to the 90s, that was a period of kind of the peace dividend. And I'm not criticizing the decisions that were made there. They were made for appropriate reasons at the time, but we lost that time to start recapitalization. When 9/11 happened, we had another opportunity to do some recapitalization. But the fact is that while we did some, we put a lot of money towards what we were focused on at the time, which was a counterterrorism fight. And that looks very much different than the fight that we see in the future, wherever that could materialize in the world. And so that's a lost opportunity. In the meantime, our platforms, our infrastructure continues to age. And we find ourselves now where, it's time to get serious about this recapitalization. And so now we've created this tension between the force that we know that we need to have, that we want to have, and the force that we are operating. And it's tempting to say that we can do both of those things simultaneously. And you can, but it's extraordinarily expensive to do that. The era of what I call the post-9/11 large S is over. Those years, about 20 or so years following 9/11, saw a lot of increase in the DoD top line. And the Air Force got its fair share. To be fair, there were ups and downs. We had some challenges along the way. But generally speaking, we had a lot of money. But that's over. And we saw that with the 25 budget. And that was kind of punctuated by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. If you were following along, that kind of capped DoD's top lines. And in fact, made us go in and make some choices within our program, frankly, that we didn't want to have to make. But that was just the decision that was made at the time. 26, which we have just completed and submitted to OSD, didn't have that same cap on it. But very similarly, it's a flat line top line. And so with cost increases and other impacts in the defense industry, it's a net loss of buying power. And so that's a very tricky place for us to be. So this tension is something that's kind of something that we've walked into. There's other external tensions that we have to deal with as well. Of course, there's continuing resolutions, which most people are pretty familiar with, but that kind of stifles our ability to do things at the rate and pace that we know is necessary, and frankly, that everybody agrees is necessary. But those have accrued over time, and so that creates a bit of a challenge for us. So that's a bit of an external driver for us. The other thing that I think we've realized is that the pace of tech integration is too slow to the environment. We're just not turning rapidly enough. The era of taking 20 years to develop your next weapon system or your next technology, I think is over. We have got to be more agile, take a little bit more risk, but at the end of the day, develop capability in a much quicker timeline than what we've been accustomed to doing. And frankly, we like what we're seeing in some of the non-traditional vendors. And this is, I think, case in point with our CCA announcements this past year, going with Anduril and General Atomics. Some of these companies that are able to use their IRAD to develop, to buy down some of that risk that traditionally we have shouldered the burden on, and really deliver much more rapidly capabilities than we've seen. And it's not just those. I mean, same thing you see in SpaceX, who's really kind of revolutionized space delivery systems. So it can be done. But that is another external factor that we struggle with. COVID is over, but that was certainly an external factor that continues to kind of linger for us. I mean, we're not burdened with the pandemic as we were years ago, but the lingering effects of COVID are still apparent within the industrial base, whether that's within the workforce or within diminishing manufacturing supplies or any number of other things. I mean, it is a reality of the environment that we find ourselves in. And so, it's very easy in the environment that we are in to point fingers. And there's plenty of people to point fingers at. I mean, we can point fingers at Congress, we can point fingers at industry, we can point fingers at the other services, at OSD, at each other. But I always tell everybody, I mean, we are all on the same team here. We are all trying to get to the same goal. And that's what we have to keep in mind. And I think that's one of the huge benefits that we're seeing with the work that Mr. Lawhead's team has done in the A57 with the force design and kind of setting that marker out on the horizon that we can all shoot towards. Now, the force design shouldn't be misconstrued as a force structure statement. It is a guiding set of principles and desires that we want to go to. And there is a lot of capability planning that has to go on. And I think that's where some of these new GPC structures that we're looking at, namely the Integrated Capabilities Command and others, are really going to be able to sink their teeth into that goalpost that we're aiming for and pull out the technologies that are really promising, such that we, on the plans and program side, can catch those and fit them into the reality of the budgets that we're dealing with today. And so it's not just a one and done thing. I mean, this is going to take, I think, some discipline that maybe we have not been as good at as we should have been in the past, to stick with it. And things are going to change. And so an element of that discipline is communications and transparency. And when things do change, we have to kind of come clean on it. We have to explain it. And then we have to have the alternatives developed in order to move out so we don't lose the time. The one commodity that we have is time that we just can't get back. But I think we're on a good path here with that. As we look into the future, in just the near term, there's a lot of uncertainty. We are waiting on the 25 budget to be passed. And I said that we're not harbored by the Fiscal Responsibility Act unless we don't get a budget passed until too late in the spring, in which case there's some impacts to our 25 budget. So we're eager to see that get passed. In the meantime, I said that we've been working on 26. We've developed that and presented it to OSD. Of course, the team in OSD right now is not going to be the OSD team that is executing this budget. So we're absolutely anticipating that we're going to get another redo of 26. So we'll have to do that to some degree. Have no idea whether we're going to have increasing top line, decreasing top line, but it's somewhere in between that. And it's going to have an impact of the work that we've done over the course of the past year. Simultaneously, we're already looking at the 27 plan and what do we do there. Of course, that's all predicated on what happens in 25 and 26. And so these things, they're not known, but I suspect that they're all going to come crashing down on us kind of at once. And we're going to have a lot of work to do in a short period of time. The good news is that I think, again, with the force design and with some of those structures that we are standing up to put in place, we're going to be well positioned to kind of catch whatever curveballs come at us and fit them into a program that sets us up well for the future.
Outstanding. Well, thank you. Gerald Simmons, you're sitting right on that cusp there because in the A3, you're also worried about that fight tonight. What are we providing to the COCOMs to be able to do that? And a lot of the platforms that are sitting out there today, the infrastructure that's out there today. And yet at the same time, you've got the Modeling and Simulation Agency. You have the experience, operational experience of 4th and 5th gen, understanding the challenges of the training when you're crossing across those pieces there. So again, your thoughts, again, crossing those thresholds there.
Thanks, Guy. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today and to be on the panel with my esteemed colleagues here. So GPC, right? GPC at the beginning was 100% about warfighting readiness. And it was about how do we get to be ready for a peer adversary as quickly as we can, as ready as we can, as quickly as we can. Now, that said, there were certainly several things that came out as a part of the 24 GPC decisions that were things that were ongoing prior to GPC. One of the things that was essentially in the A3 portfolio prior to the GPC effort starting was kind of the Air Force Force Generation model at F4 Gen, as well as the unit of action piece, right? So back in the day when we were under kind of the AEW construct, it was all about crowdsourcing to build out your base. For AEWs, you would have folks from like 90 different organizations show up on the day of the fight, get together, high five, and then say, all right, let's go accomplish the mission. Well, there's some cost to that because there's some team building that needs to happen that maybe didn't occur prior. So there's a learning period, a spin-up period. So we realized that, kind of the crowdsourcing piece was maybe not where we needed to be, and we moved from kind of the AEW to the XAB, the Expeditionary Air Base. So as opposed to the 90 different organizations that people show up and show up from, they're now showing up from 60 different organizations, right? Well, that's better, but we need to improve that. So we go from the XAB, which is what's happening right now, and we were already working on the Air Task Force, the ATF, and that's essentially from about 3 different locations that you pull people from. Again, getting to the warfighting readiness piece so that as soon as people get to the actual fight, they're ready to go on day one. So out of the GPC effort, we got the unit of action task, and the unit of action is kind of how you get to the combat wing, the institutional wing, and the air base wing construct that we're moving to now. With respect to unit of action and F4 Gen, the whole point of that is to get to the place that we can communicate what risk we're accepting, as well as the capacity that we have. Communicate that to Congress, communicate that to the Joint Force, all in the name of getting to the readiness place that we need to get to, protecting units that aren't deployed so that they can kind of build readiness, and then the units that are actually about to deploy, getting them there, ready to go on day one for that night one threat that Guy just spoke of. So that's work that was ongoing prior to to GPC. Other things that happen as a result of GPC that are within the A3 portfolio, and it gets after what Mr. Law had talked about with respect to kind of the change in environment. The big one for us is the service level exercise. We are in a place, and GPC identified or highlighted this for us, we're in a place now that we are no longer operating from a sanctuary in the homeland. Back in the day, you didn't have to worry about contested generation. You didn't really have to worry about contested deployment. You get to wherever base you're going to start the fight. You take off, you go to the tanker, you get to the push line, and then at that point, that's when you're fighting. That's not the environment that we live in right now. The current adversary is going to contest everything that we do. So the service level exercise gets to the point that Mr. Law had made about, having to tie together things from a mission standpoint that we've traditionally not tied together. So once you get to the service level exercise, and that's going to take place next summer for us, there will still be things in that exercise that you don't do, whether that be for operational security concerns or whether that be for operational test and training infrastructure concerns. There are certain things that we can't get to. Airspace limitations, i.e. we don't have enough airspace. Threat limitations, we don't have the right threats to replicate the adversary that we're going to see. Adversary air, we don't have the adversary air picture that we need to provide to be able to test our units up to that night one high-end readiness test that we need to present to them so that they're ready to go on at a moment's notice. So in the instance to where you can't do that in the service level exercise, and again, the service level exercise is good because it's going to test some other things. It's going to test the C2 piece that Mr. Law had mentioned. It's going to test kind of the sustainment piece. It's going to test getting to and from the actual fight. There's all goodness there, but there's another aspect to it, and that's where the synthetic comes in. That's where Joint Simulation Environment and JSE comes in. That gives you what you need to be able to pull all the players in, service level and joint, and partner nations as well. Pull them all in and execute high-end tactics and get sets and reps so that on night one you are ready to go. So again, what it's all about, readiness, high-end readiness, ready to go on night one. We want to get there as quickly as we can. Thanks.
Very good. So I've got the audience questions here. The first one's a good question that I'll start off. So it's about educating decision makers. So I'm going to lead off a little bit by so about 6 months ago, our CEO and President, Honorable David Norquist, sat down with our staff and primarily our senior leadership to look at exactly what General Tabor mentioned. We've got a big changeover coming, right? We've got a new administration. We've got a lot of new folks in Congress and a lot of folks who don't have a lot of experience either in government and in some cases with Department of Defense and others. And so part of Mr. Norquist's effort was to say, how do we educate them? How do we start doing it? So we started this effort earlier. And I'll tell you I'm going to start with one example, and that is continuing resolutions, right? A political tool right now. But most of the folks who are using it don't understand the impact it is having within their constituents, within their areas. And so NDIA strategy and policy, and many of you are part of that, working with vital signs and looking at the health of the defense industrial base. But we, under Ms. Jen Stewart, we developed this heat map. And it's really showing all of the small businesses and the folks that are contributing, whether it be to modeling and simulation, whether it be to the infrastructure, whether it be to all of those things that we're talking about on the floor, but to really let them know the impact that it is actually having on their constituents, their community. And so we started that education process very early to do that before they're even taking their seats, whether it be in Congress and some of these new positions that are going to be out there with the administration. And so that is really becoming a focus for them to understand and be educated on that as the folks who are, will be deciding what the budget is and what those type pieces there. So with that lead in, the question that was asked is, how is the Air Force working to educate our decision makers? So whether that be Congress, whether it be OSD, but to obtain the appropriate resourcing and support for the great power competition transformation. So with that, there you go.
Yeah. That's really a big focus of effort for us right now as we anticipate a transition team coming in and doing exactly that with the new administration. And it's really just laying out the Air Force that we have relative to the Air Force that we desire, that the nation desires. And there's all kinds of capabilities. You're familiar with a lot of them. But they cost, and those are the things that are that you can see. There's also the things I kind of alluded to that are really foundational to what we need, whether that's the infrastructure, the actual buildings, dormitories. There's enterprise IT. I mean, that has been, I think, for DoD-wide, something that has been neglected would be the wrong word, but has not been very actively managed. I mean, what I kind of say flippantly, admittedly, is that as soon as we started plugging things in on our desk, we just let it go wild. And it's been kind of a pickup game of, upgrades and, an attempt to get things level set that has not gone very well. That's a huge technical debt that we have accrued. That frankly we can't spend our way out of in one fell swoop. And so I think that's probably a key thing to educate people on, is that these things can't be undone overnight. It's not a light switch that you just flip on and, okay, everything's fixed. It takes that long-term strategy and, as I mentioned before, that discipline to stick with it in order to kind of rise everything simultaneously. And there are arguably some things that are more important than others. But that is very much governed by where you sit. And each of those entities, whether you're sitting in the White House, you're sitting in Congress, you're sitting in OSD, or you're sitting in a service, you have a very different perspective on. And so I go back to our transparency, our logic based on the force design of where we want to go that governs how successful that we're going to be.
Other panels?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one as well. I mentioned in my opening remarks about kind of the F4Gen model, and that's inherently designed to show clearly and allow you to clearly articulate where capacity limitations exist. And the chief has come out, I think it was last week, where he mentioned the fact that he thinks that we need more Air Force. That's one of the things that's going to help us articulate that. Another thing, one of the GPC efforts is for the Generate Readiness line of effort, we're working on modernizing the way we assess and report readiness through the Defense Readiness Reporting System, so DRS. Going to that to make sure that we understand what the risk is that we're accepting today. General Slife, the Vice Chief, talks about this a lot. He mentions GPC in the terms of GPCs. Most of the things that we're doing with GPC aren't introducing new risk, it's helping us see the risk that was already there. So that's one of the things that we're trying to get after, to be able to then go to all of the stakeholders that have a play and articulate what the issues are, what the challenges are, and what we think we need to from a force standpoint to do what we're being asked to do.
Good, thank you.
Guy, can I just
please.
piggyback on General Tabor's comments? So one of the things that has really aided this conversation, again, whether it's Congress, OSD, Joint Staff, the White House, has been consistency. So the fact that our National Defense Strategy really hasn't significantly changed since 2018 is certainly helpful. The fact that the entire joint force, if you take the NDS, distill it down into the joint warfighting concept, distill it down into the Air Force future operating concept, all of that has been consistent. Now, as we iterate through budget cycles, we can take those critical capabilities we need and consistently develop the narrative that here's the threat, and we go over the Hill a lot and talk about what threat is out there that is driving all this. Here's the threat. Here's the joint force you need. This is the Air Force you need to be a part of that joint force. And at multiple levels of classification, you can break it down depending on who you're talking to. The other critical piece of this narrative that we really learned from was driven home by the operational imperatives. And that is, there perhaps was a time where the requirement professionals developed, capability development documents, and they chucked them over the transom to the acquisition professionals in a particular program office, and they try to develop. And meanwhile, the A8 is trying to figure out what they can and can't fund. Until you get the acquirers, the requirers, and the resourcers all working together and iteratively, you can't reach that shiny point on the hill that General Tabor talked about. So we set a goal to get towards something, and then we work together to iterate through all the machinations and CRs and budget cycles, everything that affects the ability to reach that goal. And we continue to work through it. As new technology comes in, maybe that's a driving force to something that's cheaper that you can get after. So the consistency of that narrative, I think, has been really critical to gaining traction, both on the Hill and then within certainly the Pentagon. Thanks.
So as we stood up U.S. Cyber Command, we leveraged a lot of the training and education that the NSA was doing. We had a very different mission, right, between Title 10, Title 50. But we leveraged that, and then we kept looking to say, when is the split going to happen, right? We did several task forces to say, with very different missions, while still looking at how do we continue to work, and we still have that single director with General Hawk right now, right, doing both of those. One of the questions here, obviously observant that we don't have a Space Force. We're Department of the Air Force, but we don't necessarily have a Space Force person sitting up here. So the question that they're really asking is, how is the Department of the Air Force integrating with or diversifying from the Space Force training and education, still under the Department of the Air Force, with things such as STARCOM? So how are we, where are we doing it right, and where's it going in the future?
I can take that one.
Yep.
So first of all, I'd say the Space Force, I think, faces an unprecedented challenge of having to stand up a service at the same time that they are prosecuting a warfighting mission as a domain owner. So I don't think it's the same as just looking back at how the Marine Corps and the Navy sort of evolved over a couple hundred years. And I think they should be afforded some time to establish their own timeline for choosing to follow a within the Air Force model versus we would like to be our own Space Force with everything from whether it's basic training or a basic officer course that is owned and operated by the Space Force, all the way up through their PME. So again, culture and heritage are important. And so they have taken some meaningful steps, and what we're trying to be is loyal wingmen. So at Air University, they are welcome to leverage our curriculum, our facilities, our instructors for as long as they need to and want to. And so a good example there, so officer training school, like all of their officers come through. They have cadre instructors that are guardians. And when they commission, they go back to the Space Force, now has their own, they've just stood up their training pipeline that they've decided they're going to go to a year of intel, space, and cyber training. The captain's course at SOS is a great blend, right? So initially, they all came and they're integrated into the seminars, and the Space Force said, we really would like a guardian track. We'd like our guardians in their own flights, and then they interact when we have, whether it's physical training, the heritage events, the leadership labs, with the Air Force. And so we're side by side, we're in the same leadership lectures, but they have their own elective curriculum that those guardians go through. They're experimenting at Johns Hopkins with advanced PME, right? So I think there can be some criticism that hey, you're a war-fighting domain and you're in a civilian institution. They're very small. There are a lot of NDAA rules and regulations, and look, maybe they didn't get it quite right out of the chute. Give them a pass, right? They're going to get some skinned knees. They need time. And so I think it's very challenging. If it's me, I go back to, I want my own service culture and heritage, and that takes actions. You can't just snap your fingers and say, this is our culture. It's repeated actions over time. And so maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 20 years. I think the Space Force should get to decide on its own, like how far do we go? Are we eventually going to have a Marine Corps-like model where we have our own basic training and our own officer candidate school and all of our own PME, and then we can decide to behave as we do with our other sister services, where we're just going to sprinkle our guardians into the other training pipelines as we do. And so I think they are still having all those conversations with themselves, and when I speak to them, I say, we're here for you. If I were them and could ask for anything, I'd ask for time. Right? Because I think those should be very deliberate actions. And I think they're, for the size that they're at, they're very small. I think they're doing an admirable job of trying to not go so fast that they fail miserably, and not go so slow that they can't get their own culture established as guardians.
Can I jump on that too? I mean, maybe not necessarily about the education piece, but are there any guardians in here? I see one. Are there any others? Couple? Okay. Well, I mean, just on behalf of my peer, General Bratton, who's the S58, I would tell you, double down on what General Tullis said, is, I mean, they have a huge challenge here, and they don't have a sufficient budget to do the things that are being demanded of them. I mean, rough numbers, I mean, we operate on about $190 billion a year. The Space Force is operating on something like $30 billion. And the point that I think that General Bratton would make, or General Saltzman, is that, look, it's very little of it is for the sake of the Space Force itself. It is for the Joint Force. I mean, the Joint Force is reliant on space capability, end of story. If the space-based capability goes away, we don't fight. I mean, it's just that simple. And that is something, talk about educating our leadership, that is something that people have to get their minds around, because we can't afford just to limp it along. So make sure that I get credit for that with the Space Force. They just can't take it from the Air Force.
So I'm going to try to cover, there's about 4 questions that are all tied a little bit to the JSE. So part of it is just the update on where it is, where it's going. Part of it is also when you look at the ranges across the board, you've got what was termed here a backyard ranges. And the idea that where are we adding those things that haven't been, that we white carded, the cyber, the EW, you know, is there capability with the technologies we have to start not white carding those, but using those, whether it be in the backyard ranges and stuff. So just a little bit of your thoughts on JSE, where the potentials are, and what are you seeing out on the floor out there today that is going to advance some of those? So open up, sir.
So I'll start that one. JSE is, as I mentioned before, that's kind of the future for the Air Force with respect to the simulation environment that we need to be able to do precisely what you just talked about, tying all of the capabilities together that we can't typically tie together or don't typically tie together with the amount of sets and reps that we need to get proficient. It is a slow process, though, to get all of the things that we need integrated in there. The cyber piece that you're talking about, the C2 aspects, all of the different weapon systems. We've got a roadmap on how to get there, and we're working through that roadmap, but it's going to take some time to get it fully integrated and fully up to speed the way that we need it to.
What have you seen in some of the exercises where you've been out there looking at where that's going, Alaska, Nellis? What are you seeing in terms of those improvements right now?
Yeah, so from a Nellis standpoint, they're kind of the leading edge for the Air Force integration, and they're doing a lot of really great work to get the system up and running, It's utilized a lot for exercises such as Bamboo Eagle and things of that nature to just try to get sets and reps and get the team ready to go. But we're getting there. It's just not as quickly as we'd like to get there. You mentioned before kind of what have we seen out on the floor. I think going forward, AI is going to be a big piece of some of the things that we're doing in JSC from the standpoint of one initiative is looking at AI to run the adversaries that we're building in the simulation. And essentially what that does is it allows you to have one less human in the loop, and as the AI gets smarter, given the data that's existing within JSC, it's going to be able to maybe do things that we don't expect and test us and challenge us in ways that we've probably not been challenged before. So that's some of the goodness, but JSC is certainly the way of the future for Air Force with respect to simulation.
General Tabor, the one card here when it talks about it, it says if we're able to move some of these capabilities to the backyard ranges, the smaller ranges, now you get the more reps and sets. So there's a budgeting piece to this as well. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it goes back to this idea of tension. Yes, that does make it more accessible. It also makes it extraordinarily more expensive. I mean, we have a lot of money tied up both in JITC as well as JSC, as well as the ranges. And to get some of these exquisite threat systems, you just can't afford to do that everywhere. So there is a balance to be struck between the fidelity of the training that you desire to have, that frankly our airmen deserve, and the access to it. You can't have it both ways without taking it elsewhere. It's a zero-sum game.
I think the way we're looking at it, to General Tabor's point, it's certainly a balance. You can't have, JSC at every base. So you're going to have regional sites that essentially folks are able to go to, and when you go to those regional sites to get your sets and reps, you can kind of look at that as your Super Bowl, if you will. Whereas when you're doing things at your home station for your home station sims or at your regional ranges, that's more blocking and tackling, that's more scrimmaging, that's more getting the things that you need so that when you go to JSC, you're able to be much more effective and get more out of the reps that you actually get in JSC. And it allows you, again, on the JSC side of the house, it allows you to integrate and pull together, partners when we can get there, but the joint force in a way that you just can't do, at least not for a reasonable amount of money in the near term.
So the panel right before this, there was a really good dialogue. General Tullis was involved in it, in the J part of that, the joint part of that. And part of that was, here's where we're working really well together. Here's where a different service has a really good model and we're following them. And here's where, one of the service members sat and said, we're not doing that. We need to talk to you. So the next question is really about that. It's and it was driven by the Navy, but talking about SecNav and the Air Boss all in on the live virtual constructive. But it's really about what are we doing more on the joint aspect now, representing here's what the Air Force brings to our part of the puzzle. But how are we maximizing it, and how are we doing that in a joint way? So
Guy, I'll jump on that. Let's not forget that, as we talk about JSC, JITC at kind of the tactical level, there's also the operational piece of this. So there's a number of joint exercises, war games that start to drill down into that actual battle management and how we bring kinetic and non-kinetic effects to the battle space, how we train for that, and then more importantly maybe is how do we manage the data that's flowing up, down, and across in some of these exercises. The Army has Project Convergence, which 5 years ago was a Army-only exercise. It's now joint multinational. We've got Future Games and Global Engagement, which is a wargaming exercise that, again, 5 years ago was Air Force only, now is joint, multinational, all the way up to higher classification cell with allies and partners. the Navy's got Project Overmatch that is now joint and multinational. So in all of these aspects, we look at the joint capabilities. When you look at exercises like Nimble Fire, joint, multinational, soon to be multinational, very highly classified, but brings in tactical air crew to fight through the potential scenario. What we still need to do some work on is how do we manage kinetic versus non-kinetic effects? How do we manage EW? How do we manage cyber? Who's assigning targets? And what techniques and capabilities are being used to get after those targets? So that work is going on from the tactical level to the operational level and even the strategic level at the combatant commands to figure all that out. And then critical work that the Air Force is doing on advanced battle management system that actually is the digital backbone that connects that entire ladder of command and control. So with it being the digital architecture for the Joint Fires Network at the combatant command level, all the way down to the tactical level of how we actually assign, we sense, make, and assign targeting to individual capabilities.
Else on that one? Okay. So the next one, start dealing a little bit with the resourcing again. Having done ACATS, Rapids, acquisition process, I've seen multiple acquisition processes, each facing significant challenges to speed the development and fielding. How can we address these obstacles to change the acquisition process to be more responsive? And how can we do this community help to change? How does this community here, from industry, and we've gotten many military members here for questions here, to actually, it's not just changing policy, it's changing culture too, right? So how do we go about that change?
Yeah, I'll start off on it. I mean, this is always an interesting question, and everybody has the same frustrations. You know, it's a cumbersome Byzantine process, you know, really at all levels, but particularly on the acquisition side. But what I like to remind people is that it's exactly the system that we asked for. You know, there are plenty of examples in the past of where the acquisitions system went astray and people got in trouble and people ended up in jail and we got, you know, legislated into the place where we are. So, you know, it's not a matter of people not wanting to go fast or not wanting to do the right thing. It's a matter of, you know, in the past when we had that flexibility to do it, people exploited it. And so we have the system that we have because we asked for it. That's not to say that it should be that way. I mean, I think everybody would appreciate a much simpler process, one that makes a lot more sense. It's a lot more accessible, particularly to small companies that have a lot of capability that want to get in and be a part of this. But we're here because we put ourselves here.
So with that given, and I'll jump, but part of that is a lot of our processes were developed for acquiring weapon systems or large things that take a long time, as opposed to something that I will say was software defined, something that's changing every 6 months. So where are we making progress there?
Yeah, I think that is a fair point. I mean, as we look at different types of technologies, we should have a way to spiral those much more efficiently. I'm kind of out on a limb here. I mean, I would defer to my acquisitions brethren to explain, you know, where the possibilities are. But I think it's a fair point that, you know, when you're outside of major weapon systems, surely there is opportunity there. I don't know.
Mr. Lyon?
Yeah, Guy, I think, so first off, there's no silver bullet, right? There's no, hey, here's the change you make to the acquisition system, and everything's cool, we get everything fast, cheap, and life is great.
Time.
Yeah. So that spectrum of acquisition is from easy things to hard things, right? If you look at the Chinese acquisition system and the time it takes them to develop aircraft carriers, the hard things, the time it takes them to develop stealth fighters, it's pretty much on par with the time it takes us to develop things. There are a lot of ongoing efforts to go, okay, the quick things, the ready things, how do we get those faster? Replicator, Raider, all of those capabilities are like, hey, there's things that we can get into production soon, if not immediately, let's do that. So those efforts are ongoing. Mid-tier acquisition has brought down development time a little bit. That's been helpful. You end up kind of running into a resourcing crunch at the end of that development because now you've developed something quickly, but you don't necessarily have the resources to actually acquire that thing. I'll go back to my earlier comment on part of speeding up this process is making sure that the operators are working with the acquisition professionals as we develop these capabilities. The same is true for training systems as well. And involved in that conversation between the two of them is risk. So how do we quickly get the min viable product, which is a better capability in the joint warfighter's hands, and then be able to spiral it? That will be helped, and I think you'll start to see this wheel spin at a greater pace. That will be helped by open system architectures, government reference architectures, software-defined capabilities, where I have to buy hardware once, I can update it over time for relatively cheaply via software definition. So there are efforts ongoing to speed up that process. There's clearly awareness across the entire department that it is an issue, and I think we have made progress. We need to make a lot more progress.
So this would be dissatisfying for the traditional acquisition community, but for our environment, for the human weapon system, for the training and education that we're doing. So if you're the F-35 pilot, you need the synthetic environment. Like, you're going to have a high-end simulator somewhere. Everyone might not have one, but we can get people to that environment. But if you're Air University, if you're 2nd Air Force, and to some degree in 19th Air Force in flying training, commoditize it. Like, that's the word I created. Like, if I have to acquire it, I'm not going to get there. Don't even come to me for it. I'm not going to be able to POM for it. I'm not going to be able to sustain it. And by the time I get it, it'll be obsolete, right? So what can I do that's consumable? And so we're seeing real success training officers. Look, with a desktop system that's open architecture, that I can teach them how to build an ATO, be a staff officer, and generate mission type orders with training data, right? They're in a training range. In a chair, at a desk, it's portable. I can connect 10 to 12 stations and get the Air Operations Center light. I can disaggregate them. I don't have to do SAP. Like, I can do low-end classified, and they can learn. Like, I'm training the brain, right? I'm learning process discipline. And a year from now, I should just be able to upgrade whatever the software is. I should be able to change software if I need to. It should be IL-4 compliant when it comes to me. I shouldn't have to go through this incredibly burdensome, now I have to get an ATO. I don't want it customized. I want to be able to just purchase applications. And then when I break it, I want to throw it out and get another one, right? So it has to be at a price point. And look, I could talk for days about these goggles, the XR headset that we're all going to laugh at 10 years from now, because I really need it to be as intrusive as a set of glasses, because our airmen are getting head and neck and eye issues already, because what do? They want to wear it like 8 hours a day. It's probably not designed to be worn 8 hours a day, right? But look, they love it. So those are the kind of things that for industry, like, pitch it to me. Like, because I can afford to use, like, it's got to be O&M. I can't deal with 3080. Then I have to go to, now you're talking acquisition communities. If you're Air Force Research Lab, if you're AFIT, and you're able to leverage all of those big programs, great. But if you're AETC and I want to get someone through a system, and then, hey, a year from now, if whatever I just taught's obsolete, our curriculum is changeable. It's yearly and on a TO basis. I can change our curriculum in a matter of weeks, and it's out. I have to have the systems that can keep up with that kind of change. And that's what the airmen expect. Like, that's what they can get on their iPhone or their Samsung device, or like, that's what when they're gaming, their systems they're buying the next iteration of the game. As soon as it's out there, they're downloading it.
Very good. Next one's for Mr. Lawhead. With changing wing structure and the new concepts, what should next generation campaign models simulations focus on in the multi-domain operations in the great power conflict?
So I think the answer is a lot of what we've already been talking. How do we integrate multi-domain / all-domain capabilities in those models? How do we integrate joint force effects in those models? And then how do we transport that campaign over space and time? So to General Simmons' earlier point, the fight starts at home station and transitions through to a deployed location, maybe multiple deployed locations in the agile combat employment perspective. And the ability to force package real time for effects across multiple domains is something that we really haven't trained to in the past. We need to be able to model it. We need to be able to war game it. We need to be able to exercise it.
Okay. Any other? So this one had some two key words that I saw in this. This comes from one of our military members operating in the ISR and those type areas. But with the increasing number of conflicts, I don't know that our combatant commanders have ever been busier with what you see with, whether it be 2027, whether you see martial law in South Korea, whether you see what's going on CENTCOM AOR, across the board there. And so there's this plethora of different challenges. And the question is, how do we effectively prepare our airmen to maintain readiness for almost at any time, anywhere, which AOR am I being trained for and which type of fight am I doing, to ensure that they, one, retain the critical skills, but they also avoid burnout. So experiences and seeing how it's having that impact on our airmen. So thoughts?
I was at the International Fighter Conference in Berlin about a month ago, and in the discussion that we had, I mentioned that the motto of AFSOC is anytime, any place, but that's not everywhere all the time, right? There's a difference. And the point that I was making to this international audience was that, you know, we have to be reliant on one another. I mean, one of the great advantages that we have as a nation are the network of alliances, partnerships that we have with international communities. And I think we need to continue to double down on those relationships in order to buy down the risk that we expose ourselves to as a force. And so we were talking about in the JSE and the joint component of that, which is hugely important. I would say that, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? We've got to get our partners and allies knitted into these training venues just as well, or we're going to miss a great opportunity. I mean, they want to be a part of this. We want them to be a part of this. We just have to make it so. And that's easy to say sitting up here on the stage. The technical aspect of that is very challenging, admittedly. But I think that is at least an element of how we approach that.
I think for us, from a force design standpoint, we kind of think of the world in three mission areas. And mission area one is kind of that highly contested environment, but it's not, we don't just need forces that can operate in that environment. We have to be able to operate in the other mission areas where I may launch from relative sanctuary into mission area 2, which is a contested environment where you still need certain capabilities, certain survivability, lethality, ability going forward. And then mission area 3, back to kind of the lead up to that question. I still need forces that are going to be able to launch air-to-air missiles against one-way UAVs in the CENTCOM AOR under relatively benign threat conditions. All the way across that spectrum to mission area 1, where at a point in place and time of our choosing are able to either work within or penetrate into that highly contested space, force package for purpose, and then disaggregate.
Okay. So I think this brings up, we spent a couple decades working on the counterterrorism, the low threat environments, but we have experience back from what I'm going to call, from where most of my service time was what we call the Cold War era, and looking at a major theater war, those type of things there. Without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, are there some things we're reviving out of some of the strategy, the training, those things we did in Cold War that are helping us prepare, that now we're just infusing and innovating by using AI to provide those updates, but utilizing some of the things, and not just saying we're starting from scratch, but really utilizing some of those things that we did, whether it be our strategies or whether it be our platforms or the things from that era that you see as providing use that we're leveraging right now.
I think the service level exercise is one example. The last time we did a service level exercise was in the late 80s, and it was Reforger. But that's something that we look back and recognize as something that would be helpful to us kind of moving forward, given the current environment that we're potentially going to have to fight in. So that's just one small example of it. Just kind of back to the previous question just a little bit. Joan Tabor talked about utilizing our allies and partners and making sure that we're in a position to have them in the fight with us. I think one place that industry can help us with that is just help us work through the multi-level security issue. We've been obviously looking at that for a long time. I know that there are some solutions out there, but more solutions in that space that are cost effective, that are open architecture so that you can take them and plug them into whatever kit we're trying to plug them into, will certainly make that situation a lot easier. Additionally, when it comes to having forces that can operate in really any environment that you mentioned before, we really have to do a better job as a service at working through how you train kind of the C2 element, right? And we're getting there with combat wings and with ATFs, kind of with the C2 or the leadership layer. We're working through the training for that, but given the current environment or the environment that we think we're going to have to fight in, those folks have to be able to understand all the different ways that they can connect, but when they are disconnected, which we expect that could happen, what do you do? What are kind of your first principles? How are you going to execute? How are you going to get your forces still to the fight so that they can get in comms and we're able to continue to execute the way that we need to execute to win the fight?
Hey, Guy, I think when you look at a red flag of the past, right, and you look at Bamboo Eagle today, at the mission commander level, I mean, it's just one of them on, it's red flag on steroids, right? Relative to the threat, relative to potentially the number of assets you're using, relative to the domains you're working at. Where AI, ML capabilities come in, I think will be at the Air and Space Operations Center, at the Theater Operations Center levels, to be able to do that kind of battle management, hopefully, potentially, in the mission commander's cockpit, with some AI to help him ensure that the force package that he actually ends up with at push time, if you will, is a force package that wins, or with the knowledge that, hey, it's time to egress the force because we don't have the force packaging required. So force packaging itself isn't new and different. That's the same thing that we've been doing for decades. The scale and scope of that force packaging is what really is changing, and that's really where we need to exercise and train and open our minds to. It's the same, but it's different. It's bigger, and we need to come to grips with that and train to that need.
scale, scope, and speed. I'd add
Right.
speed to that, just based on the fact that, to your point, red flag, you'd have, a couple of days to plan and make sure that, everybody's deconflicted and you got all the things that you need to have for the mission. You know what push is doing what. Real time for the next fight. You're going to have what you have when it's push time, and you're going to have to make a decision relatively quickly. So that gets to the AI piece, or having some tool in your cockpit that you can utilize and very quickly assess whether or not you have what you need to be successful.
Let's take the scale piece of that, because in our audience, if you look out now, you see a fair amount of our mid-level enlisted force. You've got some of our civilian force. You've got a bunch of company-grade officers. And you can't do it all your own sitting here, up here, right? I mean, that's part of it. So the question is exactly that. It's with all the rapid changes in technology, workforce structure, what is that one piece of advice you'd give to your junior company-grade officer, your civilian, your GS7, GS9, your tech sergeant? What is that one for them to contribute to making what we're talking about up here successful, to getting to those 24 pieces, to addressing all of the great power competition piece there? What's the piece of advice you're going to get them? How do they play a role in their position now?
Yeah, I don't know if there's, there certainly is not one piece of advice. I mean, there's a lot of pieces of advice, but I was thinking about it in the context of, as General Simmons was answering, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, this is a human business. I mean, there's a lot of technology that is going to make things easier for humans to make decisions, but at the end of the day, particularly in a contested environment, some of that technology may not be there, and it's going to come down to you, the person in the cockpit, the person in the jock, the person wherever on the flight line, wherever you are, you're going to have to make a decision. You're going to have to lead. And so maybe that's the one thing to say is be prepared to lead. It's not going to come to you. Don't expect to be dictated how to do things. It's kind of time to rely on your training and actually execute.
So I would say plan, train, rehearse, execute, and debrief your airmen every day. They're yours. I don't care if you're in the MPS. I don't care if you're in the supply NCO, in the parts room, if you're turning a wrench on the flight line. And I would say the debrief is the part that we are giving the shortest shrift right now, because it's hard. You got to look those airmen in the eye and give them positive feedback and corrective action in an appropriate professional manner, right? So that they come back next day and want to do it better. You got to give them sets and reps, and it doesn't have to be a doomsday, launch the bombers scenario. It can be very simple. It's the time of year where we're doing holiday parties. My God, if you can plan your unit's holiday party, that's a logistics event, and successfully get everybody out the back end. There's some risk acceptance there. I try and break it down to the most simple task. Whatever your mission is, not necessarily your function, your mission, you should have 5 to 7 plays in your playbook that your airmen can perform blindfolded, calm out, in terrible weather conditions, without any direction from you. Right? So without their supervisor telling them every step of the way, and let them do it as a team, and let them hold each other accountable, and they'll love it. Like that, it's sort of the essence of, this is why people join the Air Force. They want to be part of a team that has a mission associated with it. They go home at the end of the day and they can't wait to come back tomorrow because they're looking forward to whatever might happen next. That's what I'd say they should be doing.
Awesome.
Go ahead, sir.
Thanks. I would offer two pieces of advice. Be vocal. So we often talk about, the 3,000-mile screwdriver from the building, or the joint staff, or the combatant command. Just reverse the screwdriver. If you're not getting the capabilities you need based on what you're seeing in the field, regardless of specialty, be vocal about it. The other thing I would offer is there is tremendous change afoot. So embrace it. This is an exciting time to be in the Department of Defense. And you, each and every one of you, again, regardless of specialty, regardless of whether you're in or out of uniform, regardless of which uniform you wear, or what country you're from, are part of that change. And you are certainly needed to help make those changes. So looking forward to whatever runway I have left to help you with that, but let us know what you need.
I knew I should have went before Mr. Lawhead. So here's what I'll offer. Something that I've learned probably in the last, I don't know, call it 3 years. Change management is a thing. It's real. And most of the folks in uniform and the civilians in the room, I think you would all agree that looking at the force that we have right now, we need to change it to be ready for the next fight and the one that we know is possible, right? But getting from where we are to where we need to go is hard work. And it's not going to be easy, and no one's going to hand it to you. You got to go get it. And from the change management standpoint, the advice that I'd offer is manage your own expectations. You know, this kind of gets to Mr. Lawhead's point of, you know, you have to kind of want it, and you have to also know that, you know, where we are today is not where we're going to be tomorrow. We're going to learn something, and then we're going to come back and we're going to change it again. So if you expect that the answers that you're being provided right now are the answers, you're going to get quickly frustrated with where we are, and you're going to get to the place of, I'm just going to wait. But you can't afford to wait. We can't afford for you to wait. So embracing where we are, embracing the time that we are in the Air Force, enjoying the opportunity to serve, to get to that better state, there's a lot of goodness in that. And Mr. Lawhead hit it, Joan Tullis hit it, feedback. You know, if something doesn't work for you, then don't just talk about it to the folks that are around you. Tell your leadership, have your leadership up-channel it, because I guarantee you the folks that are in the building that are working on these extremely difficult problems, we're not making decisions that are wrong decisions or bad decisions because we're trying to make wrong decisions or bad decisions. It's because maybe we don't have the sight picture that you have and we miss something. So up-channel it, expect that there's going to be additional guidance that comes out, but expect that we're going to get better. We're going to get there. It's just going to take a little bit of time. But in order to get there together, we all have to just kind of embrace where we are in time and space and do our part to get there.
So embracing where we are, I no longer have skin in the game. It's an honor to sit up here with this. I do have DNA in the game, right? So I have one son who's a data analyst that's supporting the ISR community. I have one son currently flying F-16s in Japan, coming at a recent tour with the aggressors. And so what I will simply tell you is, on behalf of this audience, we appreciate the leadership you're providing, the hard work that you're doing to be able to make this possible. You will have the lead role for Air Force, Department of the Air Force will be leading next year's ITSEC event. And so I look forward to seeing you there, and I look forward to getting back out on the floor this afternoon. So with that, let's give our panelists a great round of applause. Thank you again.